hopefully it's the same
Turn
person.
the mic
Nice
on.
kicks, Don.
What's that?
Nice kicks.
Yeah.
Oh my lord,
Okay.
your feet are
You
already
got
dressed.
haircut for it and
Yeah.
everything, huh?
Yes, I was in the haircut studio, so.
So,
sorry to be
get
late.
the mic back there, Joe.
Yeah, okay, but you better go over there, Don, because I've got all
okay.
my
Sure.
baloney set up here, if you don't mind.
Happy to.
So we're trying to figure out future strategies for meetings. Are you turning things on?
Yeah, they're all on now.
Okay.
I'm gonna take some because I don't think these are.
Okay. Good evening. This is the NBR Review Committee meeting. Today is July 25th, 2017, and we're going to start off by seeing if there's any public comment.
Public? Is there any comment?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Well, feel free to comment as you need to.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask for approval of the minutes if you've had time to read them. I didn't have time to print them out because the printer died, but I've sent them to everybody. We have a small correction to make that Michael Zila noted in the, there's a minor textual change. You want to note what that is, Michael?
It identified parcels north of Stewart's on the east side as not being in the village. It should say not in the NBR.
Okay.
Still in
So,
the village.
They're still in the village, but they're not in the zone we're considering, so I apologize for that mistake. So if we amend the minutes with that included, are people comfortable with approving the minutes?
Yep.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Okay. All right, so today,
Aye.
all in favor? Opposed? Okay, I'm on fast track today. So today, what I'd like to start off with is looking at an update on water and sewer infrastructure. We've had the feeling that this was not adequate for some of the proposals, but I didn't have the hard data in front of me, so we're now dealing with something that's more actually a map of the water and sewer systems that Craig Shankles was kind enough to get from Blue to Williger. So thanks to the village DPW for all its hard work. So while water appears to be adequate in the NBR zone, we have a serious problem with lack of sewage facilities. Those rely on pump stations, one of which is across from Agway, next to Village Arms condominiums, and those are force mains. So, and also they only seem to be a small diameter 4-inch pipe, so that would not really support increased density until we get greater infrastructure developments in that area that would support greater density and more buildings.
And actually, some of the buildings are still on septic.
Right. Some of the buildings are still on individual wells and individual septic systems at least.
I was just going to ask, is it correct to assume that for a larger, more dense project, septic is not viable?
Septic could never work for a three-story building.
No.
That's,
Plus,
thought so, just making
In
sure.
fact,
The
in
code
this
doesn't allow it
area,
now.
it's, you know, individual sewers are problematic
Code
even
doesn't
for
allow it.
single-family homes because of our subsurface geology. So even if you're building in the town, you may have to have an above-ground septic because of subsurface conditions and
Yeah.
infiltration rates, etc.
Yeah,
So
and our
development, go ahead.
our code doesn't permit new development in the village not being connected to sewer and water. So, it was just-
So any discussion of development in the commercial part of the NBR zone is really theoretical.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
North
as
of
we've
Tributary-
noted-
North of Tributary 13.
Okay.
North of Tributary 13, as we've already mentioned and noted in several of our minutes and recommendations, the infrastructure currently does not support what is proposed under the current NBR zoning. So there needs to be a plan to develop infrastructure, to find funding, and to move ahead in that direction if it's presumed that there would be increased development, increased density in the NBR zone. South of Trip 13, we do have water and sewer infrastructure that should meet the requirements, but it should be noted that we are, near capacity at peak periods in water and sewer infrastructure. Okay, any further comments or queries about that?
Two things. I think, I'm not sure, you said water and sewer. I know you've done research on sewer, and I think that's true. I'm not sure if we're at capacity issues in terms of water.
It's just expensive.
It's just expensive, as it's been.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are so many issues with water and backup supplies,
Yeah,
so we're not at capacity. We have serious
we
challenges.
do have challenges when it comes to water.
Right.
We definitely have capacity concerns with sewer. And I don't know if this is sort of a little off the topic, but related to the
Could you be
upper-
closer to the mic?
Oh, yeah, I was just afraid of feedback here. The northern sub-district, it might actually be more prudent to consider going back to more of a, on a temporary basis until we get the infrastructure in place. It might actually be more advisable to go back to more of a highway business, B3 type zone, than to stay with the NBR as it's currently
Yeah, that's been
constructed.
my thinking as I keep, wondering about how to do this in the most efficient way.
Yep.
And that is to separate the southern district we're calling the MUR, which is south of Trip 13. That seems to be appropriate for a sort of redo of the MBR zone.
Right.
But in terms of simplifying how we go forward, the area north of Trip 13 it really still is a highway business district. And we still have B3 listed in our zoning. So that really, until the infrastructure is in place, would more properly be handled with the zoning that predated the current NBR.
Yeah, I think that might be a way to avoid getting into the moratorium issue, too.
Yeah.
Because the problems will mostly go away if that section of large parcels is not eligible for what's currently the NBR.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think we all recognize that the goal of the village and the overall goal of the village and the zoning is to bring that forward into an NBR at some point in time. But until there's adequate public infrastructure,
It's all theoretical.
It's just not
and
possible.
it's not gonna occur, even if it's, even if that's the way we zone it, it's not gonna happen.
No,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the way that, the big section of South Putt is zoned light industrial. It's been like that for decades. It hasn't attracted any light industrial activity. So, it's just kind of a hope, but it's not a practical way of dealing with zoning.
Yep.
And any improvements that would be made on a developer by developer basis is gonna create a piecemeal infrastructure development, not an efficient, long-term development that can handle the whole district. And that's what's been done now, is we have some of the sewer crossing 32 feeding into a pump station, but those are very limited uses into that one pump station, pump station 32, and it would not be able to handle 3-story buildings.
So I'm hearing that in terms of what we want to do moving forward, that we may want to return the northern NBR section back to B3.
Or something like it, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't get
I
too
want to time to craft a whole new zoning ordinance for this area. So what we need to do is move ahead practically to employ our decisions in a swift and efficient manner, and to hopefully revise what do people feel about that?
I think as far as getting something done, having the two districts, the one that returns closer to its previous zoning and the other one that's closer to what we're looking for with the NBR is the way to go, because otherwise we're just
sewer and don't belong in the NBR zone. They need to go back to R1. And along with BOCES, which is kind of a moot point, because as I think you pointed out in our last meeting, as an educational institution, it's not really bound by the zoning. It's okay in that district too, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, right, I mean, it might get solved, but we can always add it in the future.
right. I mean, zoning is malleable, as
Sure.
we've learned. So we're not trying to do anything for, necessarily 20 years into the future, particularly with inadequate infrastructure. The thing to do is to make it seamless now.
I'd like to just, I guess my thought about the northern part is, there are positive and negative, if you will, reasons for suggesting that it revert back to more of a highway business. If we don't do that, then applicants in the planning board are going to constantly be struggling to try to figure out something that works for them with inadequate infrastructure, and so it's just going to be an unpleasant experience, and so I'd like to be proactive about that. But I'd also like to have, as part of our report, if possible, strongly encouraging the village board to devise a strategy and a plan and a timeline for putting the infrastructure in place.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that we could also, if time permits, have sort of a skeleton for what we would like to, at least descriptively, what we'd like the northern section to be in terms of uses and in terms of streetscape and form.
Right.
So that once it's clear the infrastructure is going in, then this committee or some other committee can convene and flesh out the details of that while that's taking place, and then it's ready to go.
I think that we can even write in our report the conditions we think would have to be met to allow that to happen.
Good.
And I would be willing to, again, with the village board and the village attorney looking at the zoning issue, I think there are different ways to do it. Whereas you're officially going to revert it back to the old district with boundaries and it's its own separate district, or you can do it where, this is this would handle
Yep.
those
Right.
And also the streetscape. I mean, we've done
on the streetscape.
quite a bit of work on the streetscape and allowing for bike paths, which I think will be helpful to the village planning board, even if it's not yet codified. Zoning process for this district more transparent for developers or applicants, for the village planning board, and for the community, so that they know what the vision is. So it's not a sort of mystery that's only revealed after a lot of iterations and a lot of agony on behalf of the village planning board and the community.
We have a precedent, which was the Millbrook Preserve started out as just a sketch, an idea, and then, you know, a map. And for many projects and many years, that was enough to really help shape impact projects in terms of, in a positive way, in terms of how they ended up looking and where they went and where they didn't. And so a streetscape along this corridor, even if that zoning isn't fully there to support it yet, would be a big help. So.
Okay. So, are you comfortable with the streetscape we came up with at the last meeting?
Yeah, the one you sent around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Kara?
Well, what I didn't hear you mention, I heard you mention setbacks and streetscape. Scale would be the other, I think, significant issue.
In terms of buildings.
We haven't got some
Buildings,
buildings yet.
yeah.
Okay.
We're going to be working on.
We're going to do
standards.
that
Got it.
in a minute or two.
Got
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so any further thoughts about water and sewer infrastructure or the sort of revived idea of reverting certain portions of the current NBR back to their former zoning areas where they might sit more comfortably?
Well, and like Michael said, though, if we can give better information we can give as to when we think, you know, what the conditions would have to be met to
In
go
order
to
to-
this, it gives people who own the properties there a more informed decision. They can
Right.
decide if they want to go forward with something under the current zoning, or if they feel that we can stick it out with what we've got for now until we get the proper infrastructure and then move ahead with a more
There was
major
a
development.
revised version sent around.
said-
Oh, no, I
Reach out
know,
to
I just didn't
property
print it.
Oh.
So
Well, no, I'm saying-
marking this one up to
Okay.
review.
Now, once we set the ordinance up in such a way so it's clear to them what their options are.
Okay. Yeah, the saying, the answer will reveal itself in the passage of time, and I think it just has.
Yeah.
That's the logical thing to do.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to the discussion of architectural standards in the revised NBR code. So one of the issues here is the 2015 zoning change eliminated the reference to the comprehensive plan's required design overlay standards. These addressed general considerations of architectural compatibility together with illustrations, and back several months ago, I prepared something called design guideline history in this zone as to what had happened over time to this particular situation. So the design guidelines, which are in pages 30 and 31 of the comprehensive plan, refer to a proposed design overlay district, but the 2013 zoning ordinance referred to it as the design overlay proposals. So these address design guidelines in a general way. In determining, I'm reading now from the comprehensive plan, in determining the appropriateness of buildings, design elements of proposed buildings should be evaluated in relation to existing, adjacent, or surrounding buildings. Illustrations showing the elements that should be examined can be found at the end of the design guidelines. In most cases, to be considered appropriate, new buildings should be rural in character and similar to existing buildings in the following respects: height, bulk and general massing, major divisions or rhythms of the facade, proportion of openings, i.e. window-to-wall relationships, roof treatment, materials, colors, and textures of buildings and signage, in general natural materials such as stone, brick, wood siding, shingles, and slate are preferred to industrial or artificial materials such as raw or exposed aggregate concrete, anodized or galvanized metal, tinted glass, plastic, vinyl, etc. 7, general architectural character, horizontal and vertical emphasis, scale, stylistic features and themes, e.g., i.e., porches, cornices, detail, and ornament. 8, relation to street, 9, except where physical constraints, site configuration, or safety considerations preclude district compliance, all parking must be accessible by driveway to the parking lots of adjacent non-residential uses and land zone for non-residential uses. So I don't know if people remember those diagrams of architectural compatibility. I did not bring those, but they were diagrams, none of which were more than 3 stories, and we can access those on the computer if people think they're helpful. I would like to put back into this redo of the NBR some general considerations. If we're not happy with facade illustrations as to what the NBR district building should look like, which is another option, then perhaps we could have these general guidelines. The other option would be to use Lloyd's approach, which is to define things more specifically, and these are in that thing that I gave everybody out last time. It's the building part, building guidelines, building design standard, page 6. Did people bring those?
I just looked at them yesterday, so I remember.
Okay. So this is the local law filing thing. So this had various items in it. The building design standards are also on page 15, if you have that one. There's 2 different versions of this. I think you've got this one.
Okay,
Right.
did you give that out last time?
No, that's the one I gave out before. They're the same, they're just
You're looking at all this
different
stuff?
format. Yes.
Okay.
So that one's like page 14 or 15. Yeah, building design standards starts on page 15. There it goes, halfway down there. Yeah, where your thumb is.
Yeah, no, I got it.
Okay, so building design standards. And it has also pictures that appear on the previous pages. So here we have, pictures of what buildings might want to look like in the zone. So the ones that might be appropriate for us are the shop front, and or the urban. The shop front has a greater window percentage. Shop front basically has really large windows on the bottom floor, which invite pedestrians to look into the stores and the storefronts.
Window shop.
Window shop, yeah. So it's an inviting kind of thing for pedestrians. So that's something that Lloyd used in their criteria. We don't have to be that specific. They also have a category called urban, in which the window percentage is slightly less if you've got an all office building, or an office building which has, shall we say, things that don't necessarily invite window shopping in a retail situation.
And I think that the shopping type scenario, building design, is better for those areas where we have a 0 front setback.
Exactly.
And further down in the future, when we talk about the northern part of the NBR zone, north of Tributary 13, we can look at other types of buildings in the areas where we no longer are going to have on-street parking, and we're
Right.
going to eliminate the 0 front setback and try and set back the buildings more or less in the center of the parcels, with limited parking up front, most of the parking behind, but set back from the rail trail. And that type of design, it's not, the storefront is not the
So
draw
appropriate, yeah.
that, with the 0 front the zero setback, there really is supposed to be something directly adjacent on the building that you're gonna relate to. And
Yes, so
it-
in our MUR district, the preferred sort of building facade would look like this shopfront kind of approach. Shall we say similar to the iconic buildings on Main Street, such as, you know, Rambling Rose and those 19th century, 10 of the 19th century buildings that have, you know, decorated cornices, big windows, not necessarily as big as one could require now, because some of them
Yeah.
were not built with
Structural.
that much glass frontage, but, and we could use images of those on Main Street to suggest what we were looking for. If people are comfortable with an actual image versus general design guidelines. So I want people's input on the general design guidelines and the imagery.
I'm a big fan of illustrations and photos. I think that it's a huge help for everybody involved in any decision-making process. So the more the better as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, this is an interesting way to do it, to sort of have these legends for each of the pictures that give you a sense of how these are appropriate to use. I've never seen that before.
Okay, well, that's
It's a
good
good idea.
form-based zoning.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a-
No,
it's a good idea.
Yeah, it is. It's an
Yeah.
interesting idea. But for sure, I would say photos of buildings that we would like to, the kinds of buildings or parts of buildings we'd like to see. I mean, I think that was part of the intent under the NBR. It got a bit lost in the mix
Sure.
somehow
Mm-hmm.
in the process.
Well, I think not having images for people to look at in terms of trying to formulate what their facades should look like, or the building as a whole, has
Yeah.
proved to be very complex in,
Yep.
in applicants trying to come up with something, because it was basically, you know,
Right.
show us what you'd like, and it's like, well, we don't like that one, come back with
yeah,
something
no,
else.
that's
It's
not,
been-
not.
That's not
I don't like that
a
process.
transparent process at all. So, are the general guidelines too broad, or would you go for both?
Oh, these guidelines versus these,
I would
I'd
say
like to
both.
have more than this, for
Okay.
sure. I think this is appropriate for a comprehensive plan, but not for a
Right.
zoning code.
I also think that we run into some of the problems with these guidelines that we've run into with the Zero Place in particular, because, you know, when you're trying to compare it to the surrounding buildings, when it's supposed to be different, it's a different form of zoning. So the other part of it is, in planning theory, when you talk about zones that you're trying to make pedestrian friendly and encourage pedestrians, encourage walking, you know, and really draw people out of the village to include this section as part of the village, then the storefronts are considered almost to draw people down the street further than they would normally walk,
Mm-hmm.
because they have something to look at. It's also, there's a sense of safety in pedestrians with that building closer. Just that smaller space is almost, pedestrian will feel safer in it and will go further than they normally would have. So if that was the intent of the NBR district, then this type of form of building certainly is encouraging that, especially in the zero front setback area.
Right, and in many ways, it's just replicating Lower Main Street, right? You know, the block that goes from Chestnut up to where the library is. That kind of feeling that people get of a streetscape where, you know, the pedestrian interaction is tremendous, because people are looking in storefronts, they're looking, you know, for food, they're looking at, you know, what their opportunities are. So you've got a very active streetscape that really supports people feeling more comfortable, even, late at night, because there are people on the street and it's an active situation. So that's all we're really trying to do with the southern MUR portion, is replicate that kind of experience.
I mean, I guess the distinctions, the additional features in this area that maybe don't exist on Main Street are, well, they sort of do. So one of the questions is, one of the things I think we should look at is how the buildings along Main Street dovetail with the buildings in the B1 district, say on South Chestnut. Because we have a similar situation here where we have a B1 district that runs to Broadhead, and then how do we want to make that transition from B1 to whatever, to the MUR? And then the other component is historic Huguenot Street. So how
Right,
can we...
and I mean, the thing about the edge of the village downtown at the moment is you get that, there's a transition between the storefronts to the older houses that are now, some of them being used as offices,
Right.
but you've got a definite break there, so it's not going to be a continuous streetscape.
Right.
But how do we transition?
But the transition,
Same way
I-
the Main Street transitions into that. How do we
Yeah.
transition into,
Right.
back into the NBR? And then how do we draw people really through the B1 down to the NBR?
Right, I mean, that's the point, is appropriate scale and style so that you can transition through. And then we have this other component of sort of how do we create that entranceway into the historic Huguenot Street.
So-
Broadhead.
One possible illustration would be the buildings I suggested before, like Rambling Rose, but another transition building would be one like County Physical Therapy, right? Which is sort of a transitional building in, are you familiar with that? If
The
I-
Village Pizza parking lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The orangey building.
It's interesting because it's not on the street.
It's not on the
back.
street, it's back, but it's also got, interesting roof treatment that replicates a house, but it's an office kind of building. So,
Glass
Yeah, it's actually
front,
mixed use.
glass
that's a
front.
mixed use, and
It's got
that's
the-
a
right, it's got
good
garages.
illustration of a kind of mixed-use building that is also a transitional style.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it was a garage. And they turned it into, it was a one-story flat roof garage.
Well, I would like people to,
Imagine
send
it.
send me pictures that they think would be appropriate for this illustration.
We
because-
love homework.
Okay.
Yeah,
We do.
I mean, that's, and I brought my computer with me so we could wander down Google Street if we wanted to do that, if we have time. I'll have to get through this, but, we can look at buildings that we kind of think are useful. I mean, I would go with Rambling Rose, look at Rambling Rose, because it's really great in that it preserves the cast iron pillars, which are, a real feature of those 1890 buildings. It also has a pretty large window percentage, and it has a good treatment on the upper floors. So some of the other buildings are also awesome, except they don't have so much window frontage. But that's because they date from the 1890s. So, and that really is the flavor of downtown New Paltz that makes it the place it is, right? Even though there's a lot of eclectic buildings. And in your suggested pictures, like, there are flat roofs and then there are gable roofs. At one point, there was a study that Saratoga Associates did where it wanted to just promulgate the flat roofs, but that's not true. There's a very eclectic number of different roof treatments, including some that are quite bizarre.
Yep, sure.
I think you know what I mean. So please give me your pictures so that, or, just give me the addresses.
Sure.
And this is easy to do on Google Earth, where I spend too much of my time.
It's easier to do that on your feet too.
Well, I would, let's start off with New Paltz because this is where we're at. But yeah, other places would be fine too. I mean, we don't have that big a series of examples, so I wouldn't want to limit it necessarily just to New Paltz, but things that are generic enough that would still fit into what we're looking at.
But I think that one of the shocks to the NBR is really the different type of, and how it could be so, if you're going to call it un-New Paltz,
Okay.
that using New Paltz examples is a great thing, and it shows the character of the community.
Okay, so what's the un-New Paltz part?
Some of the, I'm saying if you use buildings from elsewhere,
Okay,
you can get a different scale of building and a different look that works in that community.
but might not work here?
Yeah, and if we're trying to build on New Paltz's character and extending the downtown out Chestnut Street
Yeah,
and not developing a brand new downtown,
yeah.
which is, I've been told, was not the intent of the NBR district.
So what was the intent?
The intent was to extend
That's what I thought.
the village center
Yeah,
into a more dense area, but still to extend the village center, not to create a whole separate new center of New Paltz.
yeah.
So in light of your rectangle going up next to Nico Sushi?
I'll take the fifth on that, thank you.
Yeah, I think that building. Anyway, so send me pictures. Let's go back to things that were helpful in looking at Lloyd's thing. You've got the text there, right, Michael? So you can share that with.
Yep.
So building design standards. This is from the Lloyd's Walkway District. The following design standards shall apply to all buildings in the WG district. Facades of the shop front buildings shall be built parallel to the street frontage and shall define the public realm of the sidewalk through the use of consistent setbacks along the street. So you got it too, Dan, okay. That's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shop
Absolutely.
front shall be glazed no less than 70% of the sidewalk level story, allowing views into and out of the interior to create visual interest at street level. Shop front design should be consistent with historical examples in the village of New Paltz and other Hudson Valley villages as illustrated on figure 14. That's what we were looking at before. Those are these pictures here. Windows should be distributed in a more or less even manner consistent with the rhythm of voids and solids of historic buildings and should have low sills and high lintels consistent with the window proportions of historic buildings. Okay, so traditional canvas or canvas-like awnings are encouraged. Are we happy with that? May encroach up to 6 feet under the front, above 7 feet.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
Okay,
It's not a mandate.
It's not required, right? It's encouraged.
it's just encouraged.
The shop front glazing, I don't have any sense of whether 70% is a lot or a little or what.
Well, that's why I'm saying Rambling Rose is probably more than 70%. Some of the other buildings on Main Street in that area are probably not 70%.
What does that 70% mean of all the windows?
No,
You take
it means
All the
just
storefront, how much is glass?
Of the bottom,
on the first floor,
on
how
the
much is
first
glass?
floor,
I see.
where you're looking at a shop
Yeah,
front,
yeah. Okay.
how much of that is glass?
Right. Okay.
So you're
Yeah.
taking it as a flat square
Yeah, yeah.
footage.
Yeah,
just
70%.
70%.
70% actually doesn't sound like that much.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
It's more than
So-
you think,
Yeah. Okay.
because of, the height of the windows often are they're not gonna go above 10 feet, or they're
Yeah,
not gonna go up
right.
to 10 feet, so.
Okay.
You've got 3 feet on the top, if you have a 7-foot window.
I
Yeah,
mean, we'll go out and evaluate our storefronts.
Okay. okay, but anyway, I think a percentage is a good idea, so.
Okay, so canvas awnings are
Sure.
encouraged.
Sure.
Principal pedestrian entrance for shopfront buildings with, this would be Route 32 north frontage, shall be connected to the sidewalk. Principal entries should be highlighted through the use of architectural features. I don't know if that's really necessary. That's sort of a bit of overkill, but hey,
And it's more intense design.
it's more intense design, so let's put maybe next to that. New construction and rehabilitation should be consistent with the scale and patterns of historic architecture in the Hudson Valley River villages with respect to building and roof forms, window proportions, materials, and colors and details.
So there I would take more language from the comp plan.
Okay.
I would actually beef that up a little bit.
Mhm.
Use more of those 9
More,
points.
more
Yeah.
examples.
Okay. Architectural features and windows should be continued on all sides of the building that are clearly visible from a street or public parking area in order to avoid visible blank walls.
True.
And that's especially true in this district, because you almost
Designs commonly employed by a fast food or other retail franchise that serves to enhance or promote brand identity through visual recognition and should contribute to the community character of the hamlet and town. Buildings reducing their apparent size and contributing to a human scale development as shown in figure 14. The mass of these buildings shall be broken up using varied architectural details such as divisions or breaks in materials, window bays, separate this breakup of a big frontage so that you've got more variation, more visual interest. So,
It used to look a lot like Main Street.
yeah,
exactly.
yes.
Frontage on North Hamilton Street is not just a single flat surface,
Yeah,
which would so clearly distinguish it as a jail, as opposed to, you know, actually making it look like it's separate buildings.
The other thing is, the way these parcels are, maybe it's because I don't know how Main Street actually came into existence here and elsewhere in other towns, but I don't see this ever really. At one point I thought it could happen, but I think the reality is that I don't see that that's necessarily going to happen.
but then if you have a parcel that's being developed and it's one of the bigger,
Yeah. Something that if we had this, we could have helped design it differently. But I guess I just want to make a distinction between this idea that it's going to eventually be just a continuous
Well, no,
set of
it's not,
storefronts,
but,
'cause it
but it would
won't.
be maybe a continuous. Would be the consistency of a sidewalk or a
Right.
bike path.
Right.
I think you can even look though, just even look at what Roddy was proposing.
Yeah.
That's just a flat from
Yeah, I
all the
know.
way across.
Yeah, no, I know, and it would be a shame to have that happen.
A vertical,
That's a good
Yeah.
idea.
yeah.
I was gonna say this earlier, I think that you proposed, Joe, perhaps including both diagrams and photos. And
Yeah.
I think this is a good example of where a diagram would help.
And dirty version,
Yeah, yeah.
because this is going to take time to craft, whereas the quick and dirty version, the redlining of the current one, could be done fairly swiftly.
Yep.
But this will take more time and more input. Um, so that's fairly self-explanatory. I don't think I really need to read that, you know?
Yep.
And, okay, buildings shall have sloped roofs, mansard roofs, or flat roofs with articulate add visual interest without appearing randomly varied or overly complicated.
You can explain that in a meeting,
Getting pretty
right?
subjective there.
You're gonna be, I could just see the applicants that,
Varied or overly complicated means I'm not sure either.
Yeah.
Sounds like my life.
Yeah.
In fact, the
A lot of
perfect
people-
description of my life. Randomly complicated and
Overly varied.
overly varied. And we have lovely cornices on Main Street.
We do.
All windows, with the exception of storefront windows, shall be vertical in proportion. I mean, is this too overly detailed too? Horizontal windows may be allowed.
Not upper.
Oh, upper, I'm sorry.
So,
So, yeah, these are the upper windows.
Upper window, sorry.
Because this is with the exception of storefront windows.
I think the second part of the sentence kind of denote just null.
Okay, all mechanical equipment, whether roof mounted or ground mounted, shall be completely screened from adjacent properties and streets in a manner that's compatible with the architectural treatment of the principal building.
it's easy.
That's
I
it.
would just say from adjacent properties
the ordinance. So walls and fences should be constructed of natural materials.
Yeah, we are making a new one, but I mean, it's a general regulation.
Okay, so before we leave this subject, let's deal with something that's are you leaving the
Talk
area?
among yourselves.
Yeah.
I'll hear you.
Okay, so I think we've reached a situation where rooftop decks in this area provide a really
For this
Okay.
one topic,
yeah,
but it doesn't change the
anything.
fact that
Okay.
we had an official
He's
meeting.
still in the
and
building.
it
As
wore-
long as they're not breaking any rules.
Yep,
Right.
yep.
No, that's the way I've always understand, when you recuse, it's
Okay.
just,
So rooftops.
Yeah. So I think they raise an awful lot of problems, rooftop decks.
I think the biggest concern is that the zone is one parcel deep. And I think that's a conflict. I really think that's a conflict.
What is the benefit of the rooftop decks?
It's an amenity for the building, that is the only
Yeah.
benefit.
And it isn't even an amenity that's shared with the community.
Raises, just, if you're gonna allow them, then you should have, vast amount of conditions as to how they could be used and hours.
And even if you have those conditions,
How do
we
you
found
enforce it?
Where's my prohibited stamp?
It's
No, I
also
just-
though,
I
I mean,
don't
I
think
think
it-
that's one of the things, if we're talking about encouraging solar and that type of thing, it takes up space that could be used for better uses.
I'm not in favor of them.
Okay.
Okay, so hopefully, we'll bring this up again when we have our two
Well,
members.
we'll put it in our
Listen.
recommendations, I think.
Our recommendations are that we should not have rooftop decks.
And then
All right, so, are there any further thoughts on, this really extensive thing that we want to add to? We want more illustrations, we want, overhead views so we can see how articulation would play in.
You alluded to it a couple of times. The only other thing that comes to my mind is buildings' relationship to the rail trail for buildings that are on the east side, especially in the MUR,
Yeah,
where
do
buildings.
we deal with that through land
is gonna be to the rear of the building, in which case it's mostly gonna be landscaping. But one of the things that's in the current NBR is a desire to have connections frequently between rail trail. And that
Yeah.
you may want to change that.
We do want to change that. In fact, we had extensive discussions
Okay.
about it,
Well, then-
and we had a lot of input from Michael Reed.
Okay, so you don't need to repeat. I know he thinks you shouldn't have as many.
Well, and this is because there are really difficult liability issues with having access from properties where you don't have ADA compliant,
Okay.
access, or the access can't be controlled because the rail trail is meant to be only open dawn to dusk. So Michael strongly recommended that access should be just from existing intersections, at least in this area.
Okay.
In the southern MBR, the MUR now, the intersections are so close together, you don't need additional
In the
access.
southern part, that's true.
It's just, it raises far too many
Yeah.
problems.
Right.
And
Okay.
he's run into problems with Water Street Market, and the access on the steps there are a liability issue. The access wasn't dealt with when they built that in terms of thinking about
Okay.
ADA compliant things.
So then.
We're gonna eliminate that
Okay.
from the current NBR
Well, then the
status.
only other thing, I guess, is what you said, which is that the building needs to acknowledge that the rail trail is a frontage of a sort.
Yeah. So we need
So there
to
needs to be
craft
some
something.
aesthetic elements that need to be considered for what would normally be the rear of a building, but in some cases might really need to somehow or another harmonize with the rail trail.
Yeah. Well,
So,
this thing I was reading has, or other parts of the NBR currently have like 15 feet of landscaping
mhm.
and a 10-foot setback. So is 10 foot of that landscaping in the 10-foot setback?
Probably, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I mean, that's the current zoning of the NBR.
So, right.
One of the things that we've looked at, again, I don't know if it was before you're here or not,
Yeah.
was actually a stream corridor.
Yeah, we talked about that. in the
Okay,
first
about a
meeting I was here.
30-foot setback
Yeah.
from
Okay.
the
Expanded.
stream. So that really, that's the entire length of the northern part of the corridor.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's in our northern district.
Yeah,
It doesn't
so-
really affect the southern MUR.
Yeah, this is all focused on the southern part, right?
Yeah, I mean, really what we're trying to do now is flesh out the material for the southern part of the
Yeah.
NBR, because we really feel the northern part is not yet, shall we say, ripe for development, given the lack of infrastructure.
I mean, most of this is building design standards, and I guess all that there might be places, once we've written it in our own version, where we might, like you said, occasionally want to stick in the words rail trail just to ensure
Right,
that.
yeah.
But that's it, anyway,
Okay.
I'm done.
But the point that you're raising, though, is very interesting. In the southern end, the depth to the parcels is so limited
Yep.
that relationship with the rail trail, doesn't have the stream that the northern section has. So there's very little
Play.
play between
Yeah,
what's
it's
going to
just
have
not-
to happen there.
And, a couple of buildings are really encroaching on the right-of-way of the rail trail, like the Salvation Army building is like right up against
Yeah,
the...
it's right against it, I know.
And so if that, changed hands or something happened to it, and that site was redeveloped, there could be more screening in there. At the moment, there's like no screening at all.
And so the idea though, that we would combine, this limited setback with some screening and then treatment of the building as well, because that is the historic district right there.
Yep.
And so, it can't be just trying to screen it, I think. it has to be also trying to, you know,
Yeah, I think making
looking over the
connections with it.
screening, what's it gonna look like from the historic district? And so that's why the double front to the building, you know, at least for aesthetic elements, is something we're gonna have to do.
Those three parcels are gonna be incredibly hard to develop. It's individual parcels.
Well, I mean, at least with Roddy's property, I believe, as I think I mentioned before, that the shared parking would definitely,
Yeah, that'll
you know, help the situation, because the adjacent property has, I think, a little bit excess parking, which would
Yeah.
hopefully buffer that burden for him. But that's, again, something that can, you know, be worked out as we move forward. So,
So,
the other thing is, I wanted to just reiterate what we're doing as we move forward from here, and that is, we intend to write an executive summary of our findings based on our research, and also on all the deliberations that we've had since the NBR Review Committee started meeting, and make suggestions as to the way forward. I'm also going to do a red line version of the current NBR, and suggest how it could be fairly swiftly amended to make it consistent with our recommendations. But I also foresee working over a longer time frame to create a better, more up-to-date kind of zoning ordinance that's not fixing the old car metaphor, but is using the newer and more innovative Lloyd Walkway District as a template to craft something that could be more farsighted, and also address some of the issues that are not addressed in the current NBR,
And is more illustrative.
and has more illustrations. But I'm going to recommend some illustrations to
Right.
add to the red line quick version of the NBR, because we need a streetscape such as we shared last time that includes a bike lane and traffic lanes, and the separation between the bike lanes and the traffic lanes, and also diagrams that help people in terms of thinking about what facades they might want to have on their buildings. So that's our way forward. I'm hoping to have a meeting soon, but I don't know if that's going to work out because of people's calendars. So we may go to a meeting that's not on the calendar at the moment, that is 2 weeks from today. I'd really like to have one week from today, but you said you couldn't be here.
Well, he's
I said it would
plan
be
for it,
difficult
yeah.
because I have a 7 o'clock planning board meeting. Hi, John. We'll be out in a moment.
Long meeting.
No, it's the right meeting. We're going to be gone
Oh, it's-
momentarily.
I'm waiting for the other red.
I'll see
So-
what I can do. I just don't know.
On the
We
8th.
have a really busy.
Oh, for next week.
Yeah. we have a
For
really-
next week.
then
Well, I
Maybe
want
you
to
could just
say,
talk with Andrew about
that would
meeting.
really
Yeah,
put a real big time constraint on me too. I mean, what I'm going to try and do is, how about the following week? What about August 8th?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Yeah, that's the one he was going
I
to let
have
us
to just
know.
check and see if I'm going to be in Poughkeepsie or whether I'll be available to be here. I just don't know.
So this is my plan. I'm going to try and work on this as fast as possible and send it out to everyone for review and comment, so that when we come back together, we can be as efficient and swift as possible. Because I appreciate how limited your time is, and also that once we get into August, people have family vacations, and
Right.
I know that Jacob, for example, is going to be gone from like the 9th
Let's
to
not
the...
announce family vacations
What?
publicly.
Oh, we know?
I wouldn't. I
Okay,
was gonna say when mine was, and I didn't feel like telling everyone when I wasn't gonna be home.
okay, well, that's fine. But he may not be on vacation, he just said he
Sure.
wouldn't be available.
Okay.
So I'm dealing with those kind of constraints.
No.
So no, don't announce when you're not going to be here. But I can ask you if you're available on these dates. And if we work basically, by me sending you the stuff and you commenting, we could have really brief meetings, or we could reschedule a meeting, you know, at a smaller time frame.
I guess the goal being that we have a clock ticking toward September 7th, is it?
Yeah, and
But
along
again,
those,
I think we feel very comfortable that if we can complete the work that we want to do, then let's get it to the village board before that. You know,
yeah, so that's my aim, is
That's
to
what
get
we
it to
wanna
the
do.
village board
Sounds great.
before the moratorium deadline. Obviously, our ability to get this stuff into legal framework is limited by time, and the time between now and September 7th is not long enough. So, I will leave it up to you gentlemen to take the best path forward. Okay, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the NBR Review Committee. Okay, several seconds.
aye.
Thank you very much.
This one, I don't know if this ever got turned on. Thank you. Turn it off. Okey-doke.